Proverbs 22:6 kind of helps with where we're going today. We've been dealing with the family and what it means as far as church, what it means as far as government, and how we are to relate to those things. And we have dealt with the family, we've dealt with the husband and wife and their duties. We're now dealing with the duties for us as parents to the children. And we provided 7 particulars last couple of weeks on how our children to be taught and what are they to be taught, based on Proverbs 22:6. We'll read that. For most of us, I think we have it memorized. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. So we've gone over these 7 2 weeks in a row. Now I ask you, what are these 7? I'll give you the first one. We need to teach children to stand in the awe of God, right? We need to teach them to understand who God is, be humble towards Him, helping them understand His perfections and His glory. We used a phrase, the beast grazes, man gazes, right? To help us understand what's going on. We do not just simply put our head down and go about our business. We actually look around things and wonder. And so the first one is we teach them the way of godliness and devotion to God. We want them to understand the importance of who God is, His perfections, and His glory. So that's one of 6. Anybody want to give us 6? Or 2, or 3, or 4, or 5? You had a whole day to wake up and get going. And usually, it's surprising. I get more feedback on Sunday mornings at 9 than I do on Wednesday nights at 6 o'clock.
But you see, you drilled it so much on the Sunday morning ones that... What else do we have to teach our children? We have to teach them the gospel, right? We bring them into sin, and our purpose, one of our responsibilities as parents is to teach them the way of faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. Other things we need to do? Bring them to church. Taken from Deuteronomy 6, we're to teach them day and night the precepts of God's word.
Yes. Now we're going. We need to teach them to obey, correct? Teach them to obey. Sometimes it gets long. Some of you who have adult children probably feel the same way. We won't touch my mother. We need to teach them to be good and kind. Teach them integrity. Teach them to love truth and candor. The way of humility. And I had a conversation with one of my children today about self-denial.
That never ends.
I told him it'd be a lot easier in life if he learned it now at that age than trying to learn it at Kenny at your age of 35. Yes.
Now, do you find it curious that teaching the 10 Commandments is not stated per se?
Yes, and we'll get into that, I think, eventually. I do find it curious, but I think if you were to teach the 10 Commandments, a lot of these 7 would fall into that. Those things, as far as integrity, obedience, the gospel. So we've looked at that. We need to acquaint our children with the works of God. We talked about Psalm 111:4. He hath made His wonderful works to be remembered. The Lord is gracious and full of compassion. Looked at Psalm 78 last week. We talked about praying earnestly for our children. We took the general commands to pray and applied them to our children. Pray without ceasing, right? 1 Thessalonians 5:17. Paul tells the church at Colossae in Colossians chapter 4 to continue in prayer and watch in the same with thanksgiving. He also tells the church at Rome in Romans chapter 12, verse 12, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing instant in prayer. We talked about last week, reprove and correct your children. Reprove and correct your children. And in correcting their children, there are specific ideas about doing that. We need to aim to break their will, not their spirit, aim to break their will. Right? Because how are we to teach them, like this is obviously self-denial here, like as Jesus prayed in the garden, not my will, but thine will be done. We talked about the model prayer, right? Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. If we don't teach our children to deny self and teach them and to break their will, they will become self-willed and they want to do what's best for me instead of what God has for them. But we must make sure that our children, in trying to reprove and correct them, that they know that we love them. Richard Baxter says, perceive that you dearly love them, for only then they will obey you the more willingly. We need to begin early. Psalm 25:7, as we think about reproving and correcting our children early. Psalm 25:7, remember not the sins of my youth, nor my transgressions according to thy mercy. Remember thou me for thy goodness' sake, O Lord. Psalm 119:9, right? Wherewithal shall a young man cleanse his way? By taking heed thereto according to thy word. Job 13:26, for thou writest bitter things against me, and makest me to possess the iniquities of my youth. And Paul writing to the Timothy, 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 22, flee also youthful lusts, but follow righteousness, faith, charity, peace, with them that call on the Lord out of a pure heart. Now, John Flavel says, what a critical and dangerous season youth is. I am forced to judge that most of the children of the godly that are ever renewed in their childhood. Basically saying most children of godly parents are renewed or saved in their childhood. One of my favorites, and I'm saying this sarcastically, is be consistent. It's hard to be consistent, is it not? Come home from work, the last thing you want to do is to deal with a disobedient child. Right? Or as a mother, you've been home all day and the last thing you want to do is continually to correct the child that you've tried to look at for 10 times. We must be consistent in our application of discipline. George Swinnock warns, those that neglected, discouraged their children have found their children discourage them. Those who have neglected, discouraged their children have found their children discourage them. Such children, he goes on to say, instead of giving rest, have been a sharp rod to their parents. As Eli's children, using the illustration of Eli, Hophni, and Phinehas in 1 Samuel, if you remember that story. As Eli's children who were reproved too late, and then but very little, they pierced his heart for not punishing them. He goes on to say, God often whips the fathers by those children that were unwhipped at first. Not to cross our children is a speedy way to be crossed by them. Some parents kill their children, he goes on to say, with kindness, with fondness, which is cruelty to purpose, I would say. Witness David and his carriage or dotage towards Absalom and Adonijah. True affection will be known by seasonable and suitable correction. Proverbs 13:24, we've mentioned this already. Proverbs 13:24, he that spareth his rod hateth his son, but he that loveth him chasteneth him betimes.
And I think this is important where we see God himself as a heavenly Father, right? There are times in our life as adults that we know there are things that we should not be doing, and God gets our attention. And if he doesn't, for those of us who are adults, and if he doesn't get our attention, then there must be something wrong with your salvation. Because he chastens his children. The part where we think that God is a God of love, and that is so highly thought of today. If you are his child and he is a God of love, he is going to chasten his children. And if he is that prime example of a loving father chastening his children, should we not then, as children of the Most High, not chasten our own children? We need to be balanced when we chasten our children. Be balanced. Some men are all fondness and err in the excess, so others are all fire and err in the defect. Right, this goes back to a thing that we've often mentioned several times with Christianity, is we walk this Christian life holding ideas in tension. An example I like to use is the idea that God commands us to pray, but he's all-knowing. He commands us to pray, but he's sovereign, right? Well, then why pray? Because God tells us to pray. Even though he knows everything and he has decreed everything according to his way and his purpose and his will, God still tells us to pray. And yet with dealing with children, is we need to walk in the middle way between both fondness and fire. Not to suffer the child to go into sin, not to allow the children to go into sin, lest they be destroyed, he says, but not also provoking them to wrath, lest they be discouraged.
Don't you think it would be helpful for a child if a child says the same thing, that God teaches us to pray, but he knows our needs before we speak it? So a child is going to be puzzled by that. So what else would you say besides God says to?
Well, this would be something that my oldest son would ask me. I was not prepared for that question, but I'll try to answer this off the top of my head. I think it's important for us to also to make sure they realize that us praying to God is part of a relationship that we have with God. And so yes, God knows everything, and God sees everything, and he decrees everything, and he has his purpose and his will for everything. But we are reminded that we're in a relationship with God, and if we don't talk to our parents or our spouse, then what kind of relationship do we have? On the other hand, we must also make sure that they're aware that prayer does not change God. Prayer changes you. And so if we want to be more like our Heavenly Father, then we need to talk to him. Because in so doing, we become more like him. Does that help?
Oh yes, I think that's pretty good.
So we need to make sure that we are chastening our children, and so that they do not fall into sin, but also not provoking them to wrath, so that they would be discouraged. Don't show partiality. I mean, this is probably, we shouldn't favor one child over the other, right? Even though I constantly tell my parents and my grandparents that I'm their favorite child or grandchild, they still have not shown partiality. Even though as tries that I may, she'll let you know. They will let you know. But we also, they tell us too to calibrate our chastening in the fact that each child is different. Right? I have a child that I can look at and talk with sternly, and that may get that one's attention. I have other two that I can talk to them blue in the face, and that won't get their attention.
Do you think it is wise to tell a child when you're disciplining them that this is hurting you more than it is them? They don't believe it, for one.
Right. So how many of your children have told you that they don't believe it?
Well, I wouldn't believe it.
I think I do actually think it's not true across the board. I will give you that. I do think there are times, though, at least in my disciplining of my children, that I found it very painful. Not necessarily the things that they have done that deserve the punishment, but what they have done.
Right, and as parents, we do feel that inwardly. I'm just saying that I think it casts doubt or even stirs up a little bit of rebellion to say, this is hurting me more than it is you. I think it's best left unsaid.
I think you're right. I don't even know where,
Who thought of it?
right. It's like, well, why
It
do you...
almost sounds sanctimonious.
It does. It does. I would ask you, but I can't see you over there, so we won't. We need to make sure that we chasten and deal with our children on an individual basis. And this is hard. Because it seems like the first child is always the guinea pig, right? And so the second one and the third one kind of get away with more things than the first one because you want to be so good with the first one and not mess up. And then so what may work with the first one, you try it on the second one, and you look at them and like, how come this isn't working? And I could go on to the third one, and then those of you that have more than I do, it just gets worse as you go down the line. Because what worked on 1 and 2 doesn't work on 3. With 1, 2, and 3 doesn't work on 4, right?
I don't think it works on any of them.
Or it doesn't work on any of them. But, for you, for Rich and Carolyn, you had 10 kids. So each different personality may change and take a different approach and discipline.
I was going to say, if the first one is looked upon as a guinea pig, what is the last one looked upon? Usually a spoiled baby because the children above him says he don't do anything towards him.
I'm glad I'm not even going to touch that one. For those of you who watch my Facebook, have to be here to understand that one. But, and so disciplining our children, we have to be balanced. Don't show partiality. We have to be consistent. Make sure that they're to each person's personality. But we as parents must also have to set a good pattern. Right? We have to be an example. Oftentimes, don't do as I say, don't do as I do. Right? And that struggles for children. Children, George Swinnock again says, children will observe their father's courses and carriage and sooner follow their poisonous patterns rather than their pious precepts. Richard Baxter puts it even more plainly. They will sooner believe your bad lies than your good words. Or you can look at it as in a metaphor way, as J.W. Alexander says, the stream must not be expected to rise higher than the fountain.
Would you explain that horse and carriage one?
The course and carriage? The course is not horse. Course.
Oh, well then, thank you.
No, there you go. That's easy explanation. Not horse and carriage, courses. See, courses and carriage. just a few thoughts with reference to their bodies. They have a section with their bodies dealing with basic physical needs. And I want to jump through that because we're dealing mainly with the spiritual side of things. But obviously we need to provide for them their physical necessities of life, right? I don't think anybody would disagree with that point. I will say, make sure they understand the idea of moderation. Root out sin of pride by commending to them humility and plainness. Allow recreation. And it will even say, go on, keep them from bad company. We touched on this a little bit last week, and we'll go through this again today. The question we ended last week, and I'll end maybe in tonight, is can we expect good results from our labors as parents? Right, does anybody remember this from last week? Okay. Can we expect good results as labors from parents? I would hope so. Right, we looked at Genesis 17:7. I will establish my covenant between me and thee and thy seed after thee and their generations for an everlasting covenant to be a God unto thee and to thy seed after thee. And we can ask the question, will not our God be a God to our children? We look at Acts chapter 2, verse 39, and it's almost as if Peter's saying the gospel is a promise for us and for our children, right? Acts 2:39, for the promise is unto you and to your children and to all that are afar off, even as many as the Lord our God shall call. For those of you who are going to be with us on Sunday morning when we start our baptism study, keep that verse in mind, because we'll get into that verse eventually with regards to baptism. Psalm 22:30 and 31 deal with, the psalmist says, a seed shall serve him, it shall be accounted to the Lord for generations. They shall come and shall declare his righteousness unto a people that shall be born that he hath done this. The psalmist in Psalm 71, verse 18, now also when I am old and gray-headed, O God, forsake me not, until I have showed thy strength unto this generation and thy power to everyone that is to come. God promised in Isaiah 44, 3-5, for I will pour water upon him that is thirsty, and floods upon thy ground. I will pour my spirit upon thy seed, and my blessing upon thy offspring, and they shall spring up as among the grass, as willows by the water courses. One shall say, I am the Lord's. And another shall call himself by the name of Jacob, and another shall subscribe with his hand unto the Lord, and surname himself by the name of Israel. When our children are young, I'll ask this question, is it important for them to understand what we're trying to teach them?
Well,
Let's try.
yes.
I don't want a yes and no answer. I want a more nuanced answer because this question involves more nuance here.
So yes, I do think, but you have to gauge that with their age and maturity.
Right.
And so there was a period of time when one of our children wanted to know to the nth degree why he was being punished. And I came to understand that it was a delay tactic, in part. And that really it was rather a ploy than a real honest needing to know. So you can run into that, but I think our whole lives of child rearing are in part spent to explaining the other whys and wherefores in life, so understanding is key.
But is it key? Sometimes is it key though? The question is it key in that moment?
Sometimes wouldn't it be just habit? Like, they're going to know it by habit, and then as their understanding grows, you'd expound upon maybe the reasons why. So it'd be, because I say so, having the authority, as you were saying on Sunday. You're teaching them you have the authority over that child, and I don't always have to explain to you the reasonings why.
I think, were you pointing to me?
Yes, no.
Somebody back?
Rachel, did you want to say something? Okay, good. Go ahead.
I think it is also the discernment of a parent
Mm.
to understand what the attitude of the child is.
It's interesting because I've never thought about it, right? I mean, you teach your children, but should they understand or should they not understand? But, yes.
When they're very young, they're not going to completely understand it, don't believe. Sometimes you have to teach them just to obey when they're little. But as they get older, when y'all were teenagers, you would want to know why.
Right.
And we gave you specific guidelines on you couldn't be mad and you had to.
Right. When I remember growing up, you would have us. We could not question you in the moment. We could come back to you after and talk to you about the whys of the discipline. But it's interesting in my children today. Last night actually, I was helping my child with his homework. And for those of you, you could probably guess who this one is. We're dealing with adverbs. Now, is the 5th grader going to understand adverbs at that very moment?
It depends on how good of a teacher you
Oh, put it back like me. Man, I appreciate you. If nothing else humbles me. I will say you've been hanging out with Mark too long.
are. Well, I happen to like adverbs. and
They are So-
one of the most underused parts of the English language.
Why did I pick this illustration? But anyway,
She said that beautifully well.
wow, we need a drum. But anyway, you're taught the adverb. Hopefully, you're taught the adverbs, right? And you have the questions you ask to find out where the adverb was. And so, we're trying. He has to write a sentence with the word that is often used too much. T-O-O, right? Is an adverb. I thought you would appreciate that. But he was having to write a word. You write a sentence with the word T-O-O. So he followed directions. He writes the word, and then we ask him, what's the adverb? Practically, the adverb is too, right? Too much. How much is too much? Too. He did it, but he didn't understand it. And he knows this is how he's supposed to do things, but there's not the light, right, that goes on and the understanding processes of an adverb. Now we can take a biblical illustration and say, did the disciples understand everything that Jesus was teaching them? And they're adults. There are times in our lives when we don't understand things, when we come across it scripturally, right?
So there's an element of faith that you need to explain to a child. Because really and truly, the whole impetus in the rearing of children is to prepare them for adulthood. So when you were talking about the promises, for instance, God showed Moses, but he didn't live what had been promised to him. Same with Abraham. So with a child, I do think just explaining to them that you will not understand everything, but by faith, God will give you understanding as you're growing up, and I think that helps.
Because, there are times, even in my study that I've read this verse, however many times I've read it, and it just like a light bulb goes off, and you finally just like, oh, right? I even doing some of the things with my children, helping them with my homework, I'm like, I wish I'd have known But I know now, because then I understand it better when I'm dealing with it right then at that moment. But, in two different places, John himself, writing in the Gospel of John, says the disciples did not understand until after the resurrection. That's John 2:22, and John 12:16. But we are encouraged, though, with the understanding that will come even after teaching, even after trying to explain it, when they finally get that light bulb moment. We're hoping that the good will come from that, right?
Another point, now you first talked in the context of disciplining, wasn't that the context?
Yes.
And now you're bringing it to the overall picture.
Right.
And the image of the priests carrying the ark, they were the first to step into the overflowing floodwaters.
Right.
So it's really an imperative to teach your children that whether you understand it or not, it is God who does command. We are not given the option of not obeying.
Right. And a lot of times, maybe through obedience, we understand. Because could you put yourselves? I like to do this often when reading different stories. You put yourselves in those priest's shoes, and Moses tells you to, or Joshua tells you to go across the Jordan River.
It doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't make sense. Or even thinking about Joshua telling them to march around the walls of Jericho. On the wall, we're just going to defeat our enemy after we walk around it 7 times, and then we're just going to blow a trumpet, and all the walls are just going to fall down.
Trust and obey.
It doesn't make sense. And I dare say probably until it actually happened, it never made sense. As Dodie said, we just trust. And sometimes as we go through the trusting process and the obedience process, then all of a sudden the understanding comes. And it may not be in that moment. It may be down the road till we understand, very much like the disciples. They spent 3 years with Jesus, and John says they didn't understand it until after he was glorified. And then they had the light bulb moment. Oh, that's what he meant. George Swinnock, as we'll end with this, recognizes the benefits of a Christian education may be delayed. Their pious, the godliness education may be delayed. That it may be profitable, though not presently. The good seed thou now sowest may yield a blessed crop, though a nipping winter should come between. However, thou hast delivered thine own soul. The master hath his quarterage, where his scholar learn or loiter, and the physician has his fee, whether the patient recover or die. You do what you're supposed to do and allow God to do what he does. Right? That's the hardest thing as a parent, is you want to see your child's salvation, but we can't save them. But we can be used as means of grace in that child's life to teach them the best we can, to discipline them the best we can, to love them the best we can. But ultimately, it's God's work in that person's heart. Or if we have wayward children, it's the same way. It's God. We could pray and love and talk to them, but it's ultimately God's work in their heart that brings the wayward child back. Any questions, comments, or thoughts before we go into our prayer time tonight? Thank you by way of Facebook.